Sometimes games get way too complicated. Overly done combat systems, side quests left and right, and more crafting recipes than you can shake a stick at. Once in a while, it's nice to go back to a game that keeps things rather simple. Just a focus on jumping from platform to platform, for example. Even if the platforms are moving, and can disappear at any second. Just because it's simple doesn't mean there can't be surprises. Clustertruck comes out on Steam on September 27th, 2016 for a launch price of $14.99. It's a parkour action game brought to you by the minds over at Landfall Games, the same minds behind Square Brawl, Air Brawl, and the hilarious Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, which you really should try just for shits and grins if you get the chance. But here's the question. Is pretending to be an action hero and jumping from truck to truck enough to keep this game's engine revving several hours into the experience? Or will the game faceplant in variety, tripping over its own implementation and hitting the hard asphalt? That's what I'm here to find out. But before I begin, this key was obtained from the publisher TinyBuild for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? So what is the core of Clustertruck's gameplay? Well, it's rather simple. Jump from truck to truck, staying off the ground, and make your way to the goal. It's pretty accurate in the Steam store page description. It's the ultimate game of hot lava, as if you touch the ground, you lose. And unlike those imaginary games that you played as a kid, you can't cheat and pretend you didn't hit the ground. Because Timmy was always a gosh dang cheater, citing fairy godparents' powers and shit. And that's it. That's the entire game. Clustertruck is the definition of arcade-style gameplay. Straightforward, simple, and repeatable. Not to say that it's that simple. See, you are scored based on your time and your tricks performed. We're not talking Tony Hawk or Jet Set Radio here. Your tricks are based on avoiding close calls or jumping on flying trucks, for example. You can't pull ollies or do sick flips, sadly. Control-wise, you have the ability to jump and to run initially, and that's it. As for control options, you have controller support available here, but don't use it. Look, this controls like a first-person shooter or Mirror's Edge in terms of parkour gameplay. While it is playable with a controller, you have a lot more control in the keyboard and mouse case due to the faster turning of the mouse viewing-wise. You're forced at a certain turn speed with a controller, and it just did not work for me here in some of the scenarios that the game puts you in. If you do have to play with a controller, add a dehancer to the score, which will come up later in the review. Now the controls themselves feel reasonable, despite an initial adjustment period. The game is responsive to your commands, and there's no input lag of any sort. But in terms of movement, that's where things get a little bit interesting. Like most games involving parkour platforming, physics plays a huge part in the gameplay. You'll have to take into account momentum into your jumps, and considering the air that you can get in some of these levels, you may have to aim a little bit off your target so that you can actually land on the truck in the distance. Now, luckily you don't have to solve any high school physics problems to do that, but it may take some time to really understand how your acceleration will affect your targeting of those platforms. So, a simple physics engine and no complications with it, right? Not so fast. There's some weirdness about how Clustertruck deals with momentum at times. In particular, when you end up grabbing onto the back of a truck after you jump upon it, and end up jumping up from there. You're given a pretty significant momentum boost at times. Ones that can skip a series of trucks and obstacles in one jump. It really doesn't make sense from a natural physics perspective here. But despite it not being realistic, I like that. That's because skilled players can really take advantage of those mechanics, and that can already be seen in the leaderboards. I already see some ridiculous times, and I've got no problem believing them. Because not only can you really play off the environment rather well, but the skills that you can get thanks to your in-game progress can also help shoot you to the top of the ranks. You can unlock abilities such as the ability to dash forward or to double jump, which can make levels easier or shave seconds off your end time. In addition, you have skills that you can use, such as the ability to slow time, because the game needed to remind you of the highway scene of The Matrix Reloaded. And in case you were wondering if the game realizes that it has this weird sort of connection with a game like Superhot, it makes it pretty obvious with the Super Truck power. Regardless, there's a reasonable power variety here that doesn't go too far, but it can really help in certain situations. But as to the base gameplay, there was a bit of unexpected behavior here. What's odd is what seems to be an element of randomization that seems to come into play within a level. Now look, I'm not 100% sure if I'm influencing the outcome of this unexpectedly, but based on my testing, the behavior of the AI and of the trucks in particular can have a degree of unpredictability to them. This became really apparent when I was using my speed to throw myself forward to trucks that I hadn't even touched yet. On repeated attempts, their positioning would alter slightly, which sometimes left me hitting the ground with an audible thud. On one hand, that means that you're forced to react to what the game's throwing at you at any moment, which can be a good thing. Variety is the spice of life after all, and we'll get to that topic in a little bit. Forcing the player to react to the moment means that repeated attempts do feel a little more fresh than they would without the randomization. But in the same breath, you have to remember that this game has timed-based leaderboards, and there's almost an expectation of repeatability when it comes to these types of games. Part of speedrunning has everything to do with knowing exactly what you're getting into in a single run. That if you jump to the same series of buses at the exact same positions, that you'll have the exact same outcome every single time. That's so you can find where you can really cut seconds off your overall time. If there's a random element to it, that sorta goes out the window. This leaves a slight dilemma due to the expectations of the game for consumers. For example, score chasers will generally like the challenge here. Specifically, those who like perfecting their gameplay, but don't really care about the leaderboards in the end. However, I wouldn't say the same for serious speedrunners, because they will get frustrated at how a specific configuration for a particular player may have jumped their time on the charts. This is both an enhancer and a dehancer, and will come up later in the review. Where the gameplay starts to fall apart is the variety. Now, there's about 90 levels included in the base game, and the game can pull out a new trick here and there in terms of hazards to face. But for every new hazard that the game throws at you, you get several levels that play rather similarly. Even with the attempt to vary up the gameplay in level design and to alter the configuration of the traps, Clustertruck just doesn't do enough in the big picture to really keep its momentum going. It's the traps themselves and how they get configured that's the problem here. Within a series of levels, the game can do a good job of mixing things up. First, throwing a laser at me to teach me to avoid touching it. Okay, fine. Then, using a series of lasers all back to back to teach me that timing is rather important and that I can get through it with accuracy. Then, using the walls here to take that timing and having to predict the moving lasers with those walls. The same concept here is used in multiple ways, but it's used effectively to keep the challenge varied. But down the road, the game introduces a flamethrower. You know how the flamethrower affects things? It's the exact same thing as the laser. It may look different and have slight alterations in the x-axis in terms of timing, but concept-wise, it's the same thing as the laser. So when you play these levels, you get this odd feeling of deja vu. That's what I'm talking about. Over time, you get this feeling that you've already played this level mostly before, and eventually the game runs out of momentum, and you start to get bored. Now luckily, that may be solved thanks to the user community and the level editor that's included with the game on launch. This includes levels already created by pre-launch owners of the game. As for the editor itself, it's a little bit clunky, but it's effective. You've got some reasonable elements that you can modify, from the basic position and amounts of trucks, to activatable events that can destroy or spin the platform you're standing on. Overall, the base of the content makes for a good arcade game, but it's also missing something. It's missing a spark, it's missing a KO punch. Sure, I had fun with the gameplay, and what's implemented here does make for a solid experience. But here's the thing, is there any one mechanic, any one element that I feel like I haven't played before here? No. Is there something that specifically draws my attention and makes it stand out from the crowd? No. The game is solid, but nothing really more than that. Okay, let's get to the technical side of things. For your options, you've got some graphics options in screen space ambient occlusion, bloom, temporal anti-aliasing, and VSync. In addition, you get a nice little FOV slider that ranges from 50 to 140 degrees. You also get customizable shadow distances. For an indie game, this is a nice selection of options graphics-wise and can help the performance for those really needing every ounce of power. You also get some audio sliders with a master and a music slider. It's missing an ambient sound slider, which would be nice to have if the honking of the trucks get on your nerves, which they will. Control-wise, there are bindable keys, but it's via the launcher, which is always annoying when you have your options in multiple places. You also have a Twitch configuration available, which will allow viewers to vote on events such as earthquakes, laser trucks, and bouncy trucks for those streamers out there. That does add to the game, so add an enhancer to the score for that. As for performance, the game does have its hiccups now and again. The game for the most part tries to hit the 60 FPS mark, and for 95% of the time, it does the job. But for that other 5%, the game does chug here and there, and at times, the game will pause for a brief second before recovering. In addition, certain areas are more prone to drops due to the environments that were chosen here. The laser world in particular seems to be the worst offender. It never gets to the point where it really becomes a huge distraction from the overall gameplay. But there were times that it got really on my nerves, because when your game is as reactionary as Clustertruck is, losing a run thanks to a small hiccup in performance was frustrating to say the least. Luckily, despite an initial loading time of 10 or so seconds on a stage, repeat attempts within a stage have almost zero loading times, as you can keep on trying to your heart's intent without getting angry that the game can't keep up. Technically, the game is above average in the indie department in the options side, which is nice to see, but it's not going to blow anyone away in any one technical area, and it will cause you frustration for those runs that you fail thanks to a momentary lapse in the performance. As for the presentation, the game goes for the simple yet clean presentation. No complicated textures, no over-the-top graphics work. It's simplicity for the sake of simplicity, so you can focus on the action. And that's fine by me. It helps out the gameplay for the most part by not distracting you with shiny objects or getting confused if something is a platform or not. Now, while the textures are simple, it's not like the game keeps everything to a minimum. There are reasonable particle effects from dust being thrown up by a truck's tires, and the lighting of shadows and laser effects are nice on the eyes. The color scheme isn't complicated at all, focusing on solid colors and no really variety in depths of those colors. Basically, these graphics complement the gameplay. As to sound, you get minimal sounds here and there, with the trucks exploding or hitting obstacles, and the honks of those trucks that happen once in a blue moon. But there's also a lag on those sounds at times, where it's almost trailing what's occurring on screen. Granted, I'll let you guys listen here just in case I've gone more crazy than normal, but I found myself really off-put by the sound implementation here. The music sets the tone for the high-action, high-paced gameplay with high beats per minute songs, with a club techno style that can get the adrenaline pumping. Now, that's regardless of the map in question, although the game does its best to try to match to the environment's tone. Although most of the music over the long haul can really start to bleed together. Just take a listen and see what I'm talking about. Overall, the presentation is sufficient. It doesn't stand out in any sort of way, but it also complements the gameplay in most cases, with the sound being the one exception, at least in my opinion. Oh right, I missed talking about the story, didn't I? Well, so did the game, because there's absolutely no story here. Now granted, the game is the quintessential arcade experience. You wouldn't get much of a story when you were at your local arcade either, except from the people that you would actually run into. Such interesting people. In fact, environmental storytelling is to a minimum as well. You really don't know what's going on, what's involved in this world, why you're jumping around. In fact, it doesn't even bother with it. There's one exception, the last stage, where there seems to be a giant robot that you have to fight and disable. That implies you're fighting something bigger than you. Maybe a giant corporation that's imposing its rule. Maybe a creature from space. Whatever it is, I have no idea, because the game doesn't explain any of it. Basically, if you need story in your game, stay far away from Clustertruck. In the end, Clustertruck definitely brought the fun early on with its simple gameplay mechanics, and there's a good layer of skill that players can take advantage of. But eventually, the game ran out of steam, and Clustertruck does run into one big problem with my scoring system: a knockout punch. Remember, my scoring system is based on buyability, and while Clustertruck is competent in several areas, it doesn't have that appeal that makes it stand out on its own and makes you want to buy it now at the price of $15. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but it falls on the edge at a 69 out of 100 on my scoring scale, making it a title to wait for a sale on. But like all my full reviews, you'll need to apply the enhancers and the dehancers to the base score. Only apply them if you strongly fall into the category of the modifier in question. In this case, score chasers will obviously enjoy the hell out of the game here, and it's definitely a game that a streamer or a YouTuber can really entertain their audience with. And like always, I recommend getting a second opinion on games I review, because well, even the best reviewer can miss something. For that, I recommend OpenCritic, where you can customize which critics and contributors that you follow. Like myself, as I'm part of their contributors program. Anyway, thanks for watching, and coming up next on the channel will be a video on why you should support the channel via Patreon, a critical eye on Metronomicon, and a certain Stranger of Sword City review, which I finally beat. Yes, the pain is over. Anyway, I'll see you guys later, and as always, keep on gaming. Thanks for watching. Like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe if you want more content like this. In the description below, you'll find the Steam review accompanying this vid, along with social media that you can follow me on, Twitter, Google+, and Facebook groups. And if you want to support the channel, click that Patreon on the left of the screen. And remember, keep on gaming.